Following a night out with friends in South Philadelphia, Everett Beauregard took the train home on September the 22nd of 2022. CCTV surveillance footage released by the Philadelphia Police Department captured the man as he was walking to his Powelton residence on the 400 block of North 35th Street near the Drexel University campus. The recent Temple University graduate then passed the man on the street. The latter was wearing a dark hoodie, black pants, and a medical-grade face mark. He and Beauregard were only a few feet apart when the unidentified man turned around, ambushed Beauregard, and opened fire on him. One of the shots struck the 23-year-old in the neck, fatally severing his spinal cord. The shooter ran away and remained unidentified as of June of 2023. The police initially treated the incident as a failed robbery, but later determined that Beauregard had been executed at random. Updates on the matter indicated that there was a $20,000 reward in effect for information leading to the suspect's capture. Law enforcement also released footage of a vehicle of interest, a late 1990s to early 2000 two-toned green Jeep Grand Cherokee. Number 18. Hamad Ali Saidi. On a Saturday morning in July of 2023, New York City man Hamad Ali Saidi was on his way to a mosque in the Queens borough. 86-year-old Saidi had moved to the US from Yemen in the early 1960s. He started out working as a farmer, then owned grocery stores and built a career in real estate. The father of 6 eventually brought his entire family to the US. As Saidi headed to the mosque at around 11 a.m. on July the 8th, a man by the name of Thomas Abreu embarked on a shooting rampage that would come to include multiple victims at several locations in Brooklyn and Queens. While riding around on a scooter, 25-year-old Abreu used a 9mm pistol with an extended clip to randomly shoot at innocent NYC residents. At around 11:10, he opened fire on an unnamed 21-year-old pedestrian, non-fatally hitting them in the back on Ashford Street and Arlington Avenue in Brooklyn. About 16 minutes later, he gunned down Saidi, who was subsequently rushed to Jamaica Hospital where he passed away from his injuries. Abreu's next victim was the driver of a parked minivan, whom he shot in the head, leaving them in critical condition. Minutes later, he ended the spree by shooting a 63-year-old man in the shoulder. Part of the 30-minute attack was caught on CCTV, and an image of Abreu was sent to every NYPD police officer. He was eventually caught in Queens near the Jamaica train station after a brief foot chase. Abreu's gun was found to be untraceable, with an ammo clip that held 22 bullets, while many loose bullets were recovered from the man's bag. The authorities firmly believed that he'd intended to claim more victims. The shooting was theorized to have been rooted in Abreu experiencing a mental health crisis, as he told police officers, "The Russians are after me, the Chinese are after me, the Italians are after me, everyone is wearing earpieces." He was taken to a hospital for unspecified injuries and virtually arraigned on charges of murder, attempted murder, and weapons charges. Number 17. Stephen Diaz. On June the 2nd of 2022, Stephen Diaz was going about his day at the Caterpillar Mapleton Foundry in Illinois. 39-year-old Diaz was a melt deck operator, a job that sometimes entailed him getting samples from a vat of molten iron that was 11 feet deep, with temperatures constantly around 2,400 to 2,600 degrees Fahrenheit. The foundry worker lost his balance while reaching in to collect a sample and was instantly incinerated. The lower half of his body was reportedly found lying on the floor, while the other half was molten apart. Inquiries into Diaz's gruesome death were launched by the Peoria County Coroner's Office, the Sheriff's Office, and the Occupational Safety and Health Administration. Another worker at the foundry, who chose to remain anonymous, blamed an unsafe working environment for the incident and expressed surprise such occurrences hadn't happened sooner. He was quoted as saying, "There were no guardrails, no harness procedures, and nothing to ensure you wouldn't fall into the massive holes filled with iron." Updates on the matter indicated that Caterpillar faced more than $145,000 in fines after the OSHA investigation confirmed the foundry where Diaz had died had routinely exposed its workers to fall hazards as they worked in close proximity to the molten iron vats. Number 16. Daniela Monteith, and Tasneem Kabir. On November the 13th of 2012, British man Michael Ayoade carried out a vicious attack on a lone female teenager in Plaistow, East London. Tasneem Kabir had left home with her brother at around 12:30 p.m, but went back to retrieve her phone as her sibling continued walking. While Kabir was alone on the street, 35-year-old Ayoade followed her for about half a mile. CCTV then captured the moment when he jogged towards her from behind and struck her in the head with extreme force before running away. Kabir was knocked unconscious and fell face first into the pavement. Aside from bruising and scratches to her face, Kabir was also left with a cut lip and 3 broken teeth. Local law enforcement was anonymously informed of Ayoade's address, and officers arrested him at his home, where they also found a bag of cannabis. Regarding the attack on Kabir, he told investigators that she looked at him in a rude manner, adding, "Nah, that hurt. I can't go further in my day taking an insult from a little person like that." On November the 20th of the previous year, he'd launched a virtually identical attack on university student Daniela Monteith. She'd blacked out near a Plaistow tube station and was initially concerned that she was sick given her family's history of neurological illness. Monteith asked British Transport Police to review surveillance footage of the fall so that she could learn more about its circumstances, whereupon she discovered that she'd actually been punched in the head by Ayoade. The man admitted to the attack on her as well as that on Kabir, and in February of 2013 he was given the maximum sentence of 4 years in prison along with a concurrent sentence for cannabis possession. Ayoade had previous convictions for 2 other random ambushes on innocent members of the public. He was given a 90-day sentence in October of 2009 for an incident that had begun with him spitting on a woman's shoe. She described his actions as disgusting, but the Nigerian-born Ayoade followed her and demanded an apology before punching her in the head. Roughly 2 months later, he struck a man in the face while he was talking on the phone and was consequently put behind bars for up to 3 months. Number 15. Nicholas Dill incident. In May of 2014, in the Oak Cliff neighborhood of Dallas, Texas, 23-year-old Nicholas Dill went on a rampage while completely naked. Resident Marcus Payne captured part of the incident from a nearby balcony. Dill initially attacked a woman and her baby, both of whom were reported not to have been seriously injured, before setting his sights on a black Honda coupe idling at a stop sign. He climbed into the vehicle through the sunroof, and stills from the video would show Dill's legs sticking out of the top of the car. Once inside, he started choking and punching the woman behind the wheel. A police car was in the area and began following the Honda. Its distraught driver swerved into the wrong side of the road and crashed into a utility pole, thereupon giving the police a chance to take Dill into custody. Officers suspected the man was on drugs and took him to a local hospital. The Honda's driver subsequently described the experience as nightmarish, stating that she could neither sleep nor eat properly in its aftermath. Additionally, the damage to her vehicle was estimated at over $3,000. Number 14. Paul Mason. Qatar National Bank CEO Paul Mason and 2 friends were outside the Ivy Club in Soho, London, on the evening of December the 15th of 2020. After walking a female friend to a cab, 57-year-old Mason ran into Stephen Allen, a man in his early 30s with whom he had no connection. The latter, who was intoxicated after he'd been drinking at multiple bars, accused Mason of stealing his friend's phone and was caught on CCTV attempting to grab something from him. The banker shrugged him off and tried to walk away, but Allen punched him in the head, causing him to drop to the ground. Mason was punched 2 more times after rising to his feet. Allen's last strike, a forceful uppercut, poleaxed the banker, who was sent flying backwards and hit his head on the pavement. He was transported to a local hospital where he underwent emergency surgery that involved replacing a portion of his skull with a titanium sheet. The CEO failed to recover, fell into a coma, and passed away roughly half a year after the attack on June the 4th of 2021. Mason's brother Simon was a recovering alcoholic. Unable to cope with the loss, he started drinking heavily again and passed away from alcoholism complications in September of 2021. Allen, an electrician by trade, surrendered to the police in the 15-second attack's aftermath. He ultimately admitted manslaughter and was jailed for 3 years and 9 months in the spring of 2023. Number 13. Casey Scuding. 45-year-old Casey Scuding, a veteran firefighter from Long Island, New York, was on a family vacation to Asheville, North Carolina in June of 2022. The trip was meant to celebrate Father's Day and Scuding's upcoming 46th birthday. As an intense windstorm swept through Asheville, the family was in an SUV near the Biltmore estate, a main attraction in the city. High winds brought down a rotten tree near the entrance to the estate. It fell across the road and crashed on top of the family's SUV. Scuding's wife, Angela, and their older son made it out with a few scratches, while their younger son was hospitalized with mild injuries. Unfortunately, as the 2,000-pound tree limb mangled the family's vehicle, Scuding was instantly crushed under its weight. Angela later told the media that she knew he was dead by the color of his hands, which had turned blue. The grieving woman was quoted as saying, "I just kissed both of his hands and just told him he was the best thing that ever happened to me." Scuding was also mourned by his department, of which he was a 16-year veteran. He'd received the FDNY medal multiple times for his work in water rescues and assisting Rockaway residents during Superstorm Sandy. Number 12. Medley bicycle rider. On the morning of October the 11th of 2022, a Florida woman was riding her bicycle along South River Drive in Medley near Miami Springs. She encountered 45-year-old Roberto Hercules, who reportedly asked her if she had a crack pipe. The man was described as having painted nails and wearing nothing except for a cowboy hat while wielding a machete. When the unidentified woman told him that she didn't have a pipe, Hercules repeatedly struck her with the large blade and then fled on foot. Miami Springs consequently posted a community alert on their social media. The victim suffered a multitude of severe injuries in the attack and was treated at a local hospital for a fractured skull, bleeding on the brain, a large laceration to her left hand, and a broken left arm. The latter injuries had likely occurred as she'd struggled to defend herself. A search was launched and officers from multiple law enforcement departments, including Miami Springs, Hialeah, and Medley, worked to track down Hercules. A train carrying electronics and liquid nitrogen gas to an Amazon distribution center was stopped so that a search on the tracks could be carried out. Officers found rotting fruit, pennies, as well as chicken and goat parts, which they believed had been offered as Santeria sacrifices by Hercules, an El Salvador native. He was eventually located on October the 14th, 3 days after the attack, at a homeless camp along the railroad. He was found sleeping nude in a tent next to 2 cowboys' hats and was taken into custody on charges of attempted murder, armed robbery, and aggravated battery with great bodily harm. Number 11. Incident in Koreatown. An Asian American man who chose not to have his identity publicly released was on his phone while sitting in the shade on June the 20th of 2022 at a bus stop in the Koreatown neighborhood of Los Angeles. CCTV would capture another man, subsequently identified as Tony Earl King, standing next to him. King seemingly checked for any potential witnesses before throwing and landing a vicious elbow strike to the Asian man's head. The victim was instantly knocked unconscious and remained stiff on the ground. In the moments that followed the attack, a bystander walked up and confronted King, seemingly prepared to fight him. No further violence occurred. However, as King then tried to help the unconscious victim to his feet and turned him over to the Good Samaritan, CCTV footage would show the attacker briefly sitting on a nearby bench before leaving the bus stop. By then, his victim was able to stand, aided by the Good Samaritan. The LAPD released the video and subsequently received a call from someone who recognized King. 3 days after the brutal attack, he was located at Vermont Avenue and Wilshire Boulevard in the same area where he'd sucker punched the victim. He was taken into custody for felony battery, and the authorities also launched an investigation to determine if the attack had been motivated by racial hate. The victim, a Navy veteran, did not want his name used, but spoke to the media in the aftermath. He described the punch as cowardly, adding that it had come without any warning or provocation and claiming that he'd completely blacked out after being hit. As his limp body struck the pavement, he suffered a large contusion to the back of his head but was otherwise set to make a full recovery. Number 10. Mayara Roberto. In May of 2022, Brazilian woman Mayara Roberto went for a walk along a road near her family's condominium in the area of São João de Boa Vista. Her friends reported that on the weekends, Roberto traveled from the Sao Paulo town of Campinas for nearly 2 hours to spend time with her family. At some point during the walk, the 23-year-old biology student decided to take a break. A short while later, 28-year-old Michael da Silva emerged from the woods where he'd been lying in wait and demanded that Roberto surrender her cell phone. Investigators suspected that she tried to flee or reacted in some manner before da Silva launched a frenzied knife attack on the young woman, landing devastating strikes to her head, chest, arm, and hand. He stabbed the victim at least 28 times. Roberto's lifeless body was discovered by childhood friend Beatriz Galdino in the attack's wake. She subsequently told a media outlet, "I want justice. She was a bright girl. She didn't deserve that." Da Silva was found by law enforcement in the São João de Boa Vista woods and taken into custody following a brief foot chase. Videos of the arrest were taken by Brazilian authorities, and a clip which showed da Silva admitting to killing Roberto and telling officers where they could find the body. The police discovered the young woman's phone hidden in his underwear. A reported schizophrenia sufferer, da Silva was charged with robbery followed by death and faced 20 to 30 years in prison if convicted. It would emerge that prior to attacking Roberto, he'd also tried to kill his neighbor. He lured the woman to his home under the guise that he needed help moving a closet. Once the victim was inside, he struck her in the head with the butt of a gun and shot at her twice. A fist fight emerged that ended with the victim asking for help and da Silva fleeing. At the time of that incident, there was also a warrant out for him as he'd allegedly attempted to murder his stepfather. His legal problems had led to him hiding in the woods until he eventually set his sights on Roberto. Number 9. Johannita Dogby. On Bank Holiday Monday in May of 2023, British woman Johannita Dogby was on her way to a birthday party and traveling along Stockwell Park Walk in Brixton. After she'd done some shopping in central London, Dogby was described as a devout Christian who wanted to make the world a better place. And towards that end, she'd founded a charity that helped people suffering from sickle cell disease in Togo and her native Ghana. On May the 1st, as she was going about her day and talking on the phone with her grandmother, the 31-year-old was approached from behind by Mohammed Noor. The man forcefully stabbed Dogby in the neck with a sharp object. 2 days prior, on April the 29th, Noor had knifed 3 other people. The spree occurred shortly before noon, and the victims, 2 women and 1 man, were attacked in rapid succession. The police reported that all of them had been set upon without warning, without provocation, and apparently at random. The weapons that the 33-year-old had used were improvised from scissor blades and broken mirror pieces. Noor went for the heads of his victims, and those he targeted in April suffered various non-fatal slash injuries to their faces or cheeks. Dogby, however, was left in critical condition only a few hundred yards from her home. According to eyewitness reports, some of her family members rushed to the scene, dropped to their knees and started praying by the police cordon. Dogby passed away from her injuries with the cause of death listed as sharp force trauma to the neck. Noor was arrested on Brixton High Street and found to be in possession of one of the makeshift weapons he'd used in the rampage. He was charged with murder, 3 counts of causing grievous bodily harm with intent, and 2 counts of possession of an offensive weapon. A motive for the rampage had not been revealed as of the latest updates, and Noor only spoke to the authorities to confirm his identity. Number 8. Ivan Palpchuk. Ukrainian man Ivan Palpchuk arrived in Edmonton, Canada, along with his wife and daughter on April the 1st of 2022 after fleeing the war in their native country. Palpchuk's friend, Leo Leshchinsky, had immigrated to Canada a few years prior and was helping the family get settled in. Roughly 2 weeks after their arrival, the family was still in the process of finding housing. In mid-April, Palpchuk was drinking a cup of coffee at a bus stop on 38th Avenue and Milbourne Road East. The 48-year-old felt a sudden sharp pain in his back and turned around to see a person running away. Moments later, he realized that he'd been stabbed. I looked down and there's blood everywhere. He later told a media outlet from his hospital bed at University of Alberta Hospital. Palpchuk added that he called the emergency services upon feeling that he was on the verge of losing consciousness. He underwent life-saving surgery in which part of his lung was removed. The man's wife, Lulia Pushkar, stated that the family was relieved he'd survived the attack, which the police believed had been completely random. The identity of the knife wielder was unknown as of the latest available information on the matter. Leschinski started a GoFundMe for the family, which rapidly raised over $100,000 in donations. The man also noted that the attack was a particularly unlucky occurrence for the family given the fact that they'd fled a war in search of a better life. Number 7. Richard Cutshaw. Florida police were alerted to a robbery in progress in Coral Gables at about 4:15 p.m. on December the 5th of 2019. Officers swiftly responded to the scene, at which point they came upon a UPS truck that had been hijacked by a pair of suspects, identified as Lamar Alexander and Ronnie Jerome Hill, both aged 41 at the time. The men had allegedly robbed Regent Jewelers before seizing the delivery vehicle and killing its driver, Frank Ordonez. Alexander and Hill then led police on a high-speed chase for 23 miles, which culminated on the Miramar Parkway during rush hour. With traffic at a standstill, the suspects proceeded to fire upon the officers as they approached the UPS truck on foot. 19 officers from 5 different Florida agencies returned fire, reportedly discharging roughly 200 rounds of ammunition. Both suspects were fatally shot during the ensuing gunfight, which also claimed the life of 70-year-old Richard Cutshaw, a soon-to-be retiree from Pembroke Pines. The innocent man had been driving home via the Miramar Parkway when he was tragically caught in the crossfire of the police shootout. He was reportedly survived by his 99-year-old mother as well as 5 brothers and sisters. Number 6. Canada Sea Lion Scare. In May of 2017, a video surfaced online in which a young girl was shown being snatched from the edge of a pier and dragged underwater by a rogue sea lion. The shocking incident, which reportedly took place at the Stevenston Fisherman's Wharf in British Columbia, occurred while a group of tourists was watching the marine animals look for fish in the water. In the moments leading up to the young girl's scare, the footage showed the sea lion in question bobbing its head up and down, much to the delight of the jovial onlookers. Then, as the animal neared the pier on which the tourists were standing, it jumped up to meet the child, who was leaning over the side to get a better look at it. The young girl flinched but began to laugh, believing the sea lion to have been acting playfully. However, as the child sat back down on the pier's edge, the animal suddenly leapt into the air and grabbed her with its mouth, pulling her into the water. Witnesses gasped in horror as the unsuspecting girl became submerged, at which point a man, believed to have been a relative, launched himself into the harbor before re-emerging with the child, unharmed. The video was recorded by Vancouver man Michael Fujiwara, who later told the Vancouver Sun that he and the other tourists had been having a lovely day by the water when the alarming incident occurred. Number 5. Biodiversity flyover accident. On November the 23rd of 2019, a car traveling well above the posted speed limit lost control and plummeted off the edge of the Biodiversity flyover in Hyderabad, India. Subsequent reports detailed how the wayward vehicle struck a 40-year-old woman and her daughter who'd been minding their own business as they waited for an auto rickshaw underneath the flyover. The woman, identified as Pasala Naga Venkata Satyaveni, was taken to a corporate hospital along with a handful of other casualties from the crash. Satyaveni was ultimately pronounced dead, the only reported death in connection to the incident. It subsequently emerged that the vehicle involved in the accident had been operated by businessman Kalva Kuntla Krishna Milan. The latter claimed in court that when he'd lost control of the car, he'd only been traveling at about 25 miles per hour in accordance with the flyover's permissible speed, and instead blamed the design of the overpass for causing the accident. However, Hyderabad police indicated that the motorist had actually been driving at a speed of approximately 65 miles per hour, which had consequently led to him taking a sharp corner far too quickly. Milan, who was rumored to be a relative of certain powerful government figures, avoided arrest in the immediate aftermath and, as of the latest updates, hadn't yet been charged with any crime. Number 4. Jonathan Hernandez. Florida man Jonathan Hernandez unwittingly got himself killed while attempting to burglarize a home in Lehigh Acres on December the 12th of 2020. At the onset of what should have been a fairly routine home invasion, the 32-year-old father of 5 scaled the wall of a house located on Nora Avenue and 46th Street Southwest. As Hernandez climbed into an open casement, the window collapsed onto his neck, killing him instantly and leaving his body dangling outside of the house. Deputies of the Lee County Sheriff's Office were dispatched to the scene, whereupon they found the unsuspecting burglar's limp body stuck in a window about 5.5 feet off the ground. According to subsequent reports on the matter, Hernandez had an extensive criminal history prior to his unfortunate demise, including past arrests for theft and larceny, as well as driving without a license. The man's fiancée, Patricia Duarte, told local news station WBBH-TV that despite his checkered past, he'd been the sweetest person you'd probably ever meet and had the biggest heart. It was reported that Hernandez had been a budding hip-hop artist with dreams of someday making it big in the music business. Number 3. Jaylene Holton. In the late evening hours of June the 27th of 2022, police were called to the Philly Bar and Restaurant in Philadelphia after receiving reports of a shooting at the establishment. Upon their arrival, officers found a pair of injured victims. One was a young woman later identified as Jaylene Holton, who was lying unconscious on the floor after having suffered an apparent gunshot wound to the head. Holton ultimately passed away at the hospital as a result of her critical injuries. Investigators determined that the 21-year-old's death had been precipitated by a bar fight between 3 men over a pool table. The man who'd initiated the confrontation was eventually removed from the building, at which point he reportedly walked to his vehicle parked about 200 feet away. He then fired 15 shots into the bar as he sped away in a dark-colored pickup truck. One of the bullets struck Holton, who'd had no prior involvement with the shooter or his altercation with the other patrons. The man responsible for the deadly incident was identified as 47-year-old Anthony Nelson, who fled the state in the aftermath. Agents with the U.S. Marshals Violent Crimes Fugitive Task Force tracked the suspect down to Harrah's Casino in Atlantic City, where he was arrested on July the 6th. Holton, who'd been enjoying a night out with friends at the time of her abrupt death, was reported as having been the only one to be hit in the shooting. Number 2. Miguel Toran. It was reported in December of 2021 that a Spanish mountain biker who was enjoying a pleasant ride on the Monte Orgegia forest trail in Alicante was suddenly fired upon by a rabbit hunter. The victim, identified as Miguel Toran, later recounted how just minutes before the inadvertent shooting, he'd passed by a pair of hunters on his bike. Then shortly thereafter, he rode past a third hunter, who mistook him for a rabbit and promptly fired his weapon in the biker's direction. Toran, who was reportedly wearing bright-colored clothes and a helmet at the time, was struck in the back, legs, and backside by a cartridge carrying hundreds of pellets intended to incapacitate a small animal such as a rabbit. Emergency services were subsequently called to the scene and the victim was treated on site for his mostly superficial wounds. It was later described how Toran had only been hit by about 20 pellets rather than a single full-sized bullet, which prevented him from sustaining any severe injuries or damage to major organs. The hunter responsible for the mistaken shooting told the police that he'd confused the cyclist's movements with that of a rabbit. As of the latest updates on the case, Toran was still considering whether or not to file a complaint against the hunter, who faced the possibility of being criminally charged with recklessness. We have our release on when first times go wrong queued up for you after number 1, in case you're still longing for some more daily They Will Kill You content. Number 1. Enrique Boca Negra. In the afternoon of February the 21st of 2022, a green Suburban parked outside of a gas station in San Antonio, Texas, after having circled around the parking lot for several minutes. At some point shortly thereafter, an individual approached the vehicle and began speaking with one of the 5 occupants seated inside. The police later indicated that it was likely that some sort of transaction was taking place between the two parties. Then, in an abrupt escalation of events, one of the Suburban's passengers exited the vehicle with a firearm in hand and began shooting. A gunfight subsequently ensued, leading to the death of one of the Suburban's occupants, identified as Christopher James Mia. Another passenger, a 17-year-old male, reportedly suffered critical injuries and was transported to the hospital to undergo life-saving emergency surgery. When police arrived at the scene, it emerged that an innocent bystander had been struck by one of the shots fired in the shootout. 66-year-old Enrique Boca Negra had been watching television inside his home, which was located near the gas station, when he was fatally shot by a stray bullet. In the wake of the tragic incident, 4 individuals, including 2 juveniles, faced capital murder charges. Number 8. Yesenia Morales. On July the 18th of 2021, a Colombian lawyer and her boyfriend went to a popular bungee jumping spot that was located on a bridge in the town of Omaga. Having never bungee jumped before, 25-year-old Yesenia Morales was later described to have been quite nervous while awaiting her turn in line. There were approximately 100 people on the viaduct that day, and subsequent reports indicated that Morales and her boyfriend were roughly the 90th visitors to take the plunge into the 150-foot gorge. Morales' partner was up first. After attaching the bungee cord to his ankles, the workers gave a signal that he was prepped and ready to jump. Morales, in a state of confusion brought on by her extreme anxiety, misconstrued the signal as being meant for her, and she mistakenly jumped off the bridge without a cord attached to her. The young woman's tragic leap was recorded by another tourist on a nearby cliff, and the video was widely shared on social media in the incident's aftermath. Horrified and distraught, Morales' boyfriend raced to the bottom of the valley and came upon her unresponsive body, at which point he fruitlessly attempted to perform CPR. By the time emergency services arrived at the scene, Morales was already dead, and a post-mortem examination later revealed that the young woman had suffered a heart attack before impacting the ground. Number 7. Maggie Tarasca. Student pilot Maggie Tarasca experienced an aircraft malfunction during her first solo flight. On September the 9th of 2018, the 17-year-old began her journey at the Beverly Regional Airport in Massachusetts, with a course set for Portland, Maine, roughly 90 miles away. Shortly after taking off, however, the plane Tarasca was piloting lost its right main landing gear wheel. Speaking after the incident, the teenager detailed how she desperately tried to suppress her overwhelming stress and anxiety as she coordinated with the air tower on how to land the craft safely. Beverly Airport manager Gloria Bouillon later revealed that Tarasca became emotional upon being informed that she would need to perform an emergency landing with only 2 of the plane's 3 wheels. The pilot reportedly circled the strip for about 30 minutes until she felt comfortable and calm enough to land. Tarasca's mother and father, both of whom had ample flying experience, nervously watched from the ground below as their daughter approached the runway on which she'd been told to direct her landing. To assist in the teenage pilot's dangerous and nerve-wracking maneuver, the airport temporarily shut down so as to mitigate potential distractions. With help and support from her personal instructor, Tarasca was able to land the plane successfully without sustaining any injuries. Number 6. Nicole Moore. In 2021, Nicole Moore's improbable story gained international attention after the woman revealed that she'd gotten pregnant nearly a decade prior, in spite of never having had intercourse. According to the 28-year-old supply teacher from Portsmouth, Hampshire, she suffered from a medical condition that precluded her from having intercourse or using certain conventional feminine care products. Moore and her boyfriend reportedly found alternative ways of being intimate with one another, which ultimately led to her unintentionally getting pregnant at the age of 18. After her story was widely disseminated on social media, Moore was playfully nicknamed Virgin Mary. The young woman detailed how she didn't officially lose her virginity until she was already 5 months pregnant, which she'd accomplished with the help of a physical therapist who'd reduced the severity of her condition. Number 5. The Russian first-time flyer. In July of 2017, a video surfaced online of a bloodied airplane passenger shouting hysterically and aggressively punching the seat in front of him. The viral clip was reportedly captured during a Red Wings flight from Moscow to Antalya, Turkey. According to the Russian news outlet Moscow 24, it was the unidentified man's first time flying in an airplane, and he'd reportedly attempted to calm his nerves by consuming alcohol. He soon became unruly and frantic, however, and his drink was therefore confiscated by the flight crew. Enraged, the man then reportedly began pacing through the aisle of the cabin, demanding other travelers give him their alcoholic beverages. In an attempt to quell the frenzied passenger, flight attendants tried tying seatbelts around him to keep him restrained in his seat. The man resisted and in doing so forcefully hit his face on the back of the seat in front of him. In a later portion of the video, several other passengers were shown forcing the man to lie down while they restrained him with seatbelts. A traveler seated behind him also wrapped their arms around his neck to keep him seated. Upon the plane's arrival in Turkey, the belligerent passenger was taken into custody by local law enforcement. Although he and his family had taken the flight to Antalya for a holiday in the Turkish resort city, it was reported that they were immediately rerouted back to Russia following the plane's landing. Number 4. Jaime Alvarez. Jaime Alvarez, a public defender from Santa Clara County, California, took a trip to Spain in July of 2019 to take part in the annual Running of the Bulls in Pamplona. During the first run of the San Fermin Festival on the 7th of the month, 46-year-old Alvarez reportedly ran most of the roughly 900-yard course. The pack of animals was then released, and by the time Alvarez entered the bullfighting arena, they'd already caught up to him. Threatened by the raging bulls, he scaled a nearby fence for safety and waited until most of them had left the area to climb down. He then pulled out his cell phone in order to capture a selfie, which he wanted as a souvenir from his first visit to the famous Spanish festival. Before he could take the picture, however, Alvarez was trampled and gored by a charging bull that had strayed from the rest of the pack. The tourist later recounted how he didn't realize the extent or severity of his injuries until he touched his neck and his hand came away covered in blood. A bystander pulled Alvarez to safety, and he was then transported to a regional hospital where he underwent a 2-hour-long surgery. Doctors later detailed how the bull's horn had deeply penetrated Alvarez's neck and fractured his cheekbone. His jugular vein and major arteries were left untouched by the animal's charge, an aspect described to Alvarez as beyond miraculous. Number 3. Justice Booze. On May the 4th of 2016, Justice Booze showed up for his first day as a gardener in Guilderland, an affluent town in upstate New York. At some point during his inaugural shift, the 23-year-old father reportedly helped his colleagues at Countryside Tree Service remove several large trees from the front yard of a local home. As he was feeding tree fragments into a wood chipper, the inexperienced worker's hand became stuck in the machine, and he was unable to dislodge it. Booze's entire body was then pulled into the chipper and he was killed. In the wake of the tragic accident, the Occupational Safety and Health Administration launched an official investigation into Booze's death. The federal agency ultimately determined that Tony Watson, the owner of Countryside Tree Service, had failed to properly train Booze and other employees on safely operating the company's dangerous power equipment. Watson consequently faced more than $141,000 in fines in connection to the incident. A GoFundMe page was created by Booze's friend with the intention of providing financial support to his fiancée. Number 2. Jennifer Sinclair. At about 10 p.m. on December the 6th of 2018, Florida woman Jennifer Sinclair was picked up at her home by a man from New York, and the two then went on a first date. In the early hours of the following day, Sinclair was reportedly riding on the back of her date's motorcycle as he traveled down Interstate 95 in Pompano Beach. According to West Palm Beach's WPBF TV, Sinclair ended up falling off the bike, and several bystanders would later report seeing a man standing by the 33-year-old's body on the side of the road before eventually fleeing the scene. A lawsuit filed by Sinclair's family alleged that the individual described by eyewitness testimonies was the man with whom she'd been on a date. The lawsuit accused him of abandoning the woman after realizing she was critically injured. Florida Highway Patrol officials reported that multiple drivers accidentally ran over the woman's body around 1:30 a.m. and she was ultimately found dead at about 3 a.m. The motorcycle rider, later named as Miles McChesney, was cleared of any wrongdoing following an official investigation by the Highway Patrol, and subsequent reports indicated it was unlikely he'd face criminal charges in connection to the incident. Number 1. Gianna Triplicata. After graduating from high school in May of 2020, Gianna Triplicata planned a thrill-seeking outing with her grandmother at Skydive Atlanta, based at the Thomaston-Upson County Airport in Georgia. The 18-year-old had long been considering skydiving, and on July the 12th of that year, she followed through on her wish. On the day of her first ever jump, Triplicata was paired with an experienced skydiver named Nick Esposito, aged 35. As detailed in subsequent reports on the incident, their primary parachute failed to open properly during their mid-air descent. Upson County Sheriff Dan Kilgore later revealed that their emergency chute did ultimately deploy. Unfortunately, the reserve had failed to open properly, and the pair were already at a low altitude. Triplicata's parents, who'd gone to the airfield to witness her jump, noticed a diver spinning upside down in the distance. Unsure of whether the wayward jumper was their daughter, they reportedly got in their vehicle and sped towards the section of the airfield where they'd seen the botched landing occur. A sheriff's deputy was already at the scene, however, and he kept the teen's parents away from the diver, whom they learned was in fact their daughter. Both Triplicata and Esposito died at the scene following a devastating impact. The fatal incident was described as a freak accident in the wake of the two deaths, and the GoFundMe campaign was set up by family friends of the Triplicatas in order to help cover the cost of funeral expenses. Thanks for watching. If you had to choose, would you rather be abducted by aliens or become the target of an international manhunt? Let us know in the comments section below.